There's likely one name in your phone you hesitate over. You find yourself staring at the screen, and before you even answer, a specific weight settles in your chest. You feel a sudden surge of fear mixed with a heavy sense of obligation. Underneath it all, a quiet voice tells you that you are a bad person for even wanting to say no. With most people, no is just a sentence. But with this one person, a simple boundary feels like an act of cruelty. This localized, isolated dread identifies a psychological lever being pulled against you. It is the fingerprint left behind by a specific move, rather than a failure of your own character. Decades ago, Dr. Susan Forward sat across from clients who were smart, capable, and successful in every area of their lives, except for their relationship with one specific person. When that person made a request, these confident individuals would suddenly freeze. Forward identified this pattern as emotional blackmail. It relies on three tools: fear, obligation, and guilt, shortened to the word fog. This fog spreads just under your judgment, obscuring what is happening, leaving you with a sense of lostness and urgent pressure to make it stop. Understanding this requires looking past your own reaction and mapping the actual mechanics of the interaction. Emotional blackmail operates as a predictable, repeating loop that tightens over time. The loop begins with a demand, usually wrapped in a sense of false urgency. When you naturally hesitate, the resistance stage, the manipulator treats your boundary as a threat to be neutralized. This leads to pressure. The warmth drains out of the conversation. They might list your past failures, go quiet in a punishing way, or use a specific tone that makes the silence your job to fill. Eventually, you cave. That is the compliance stage. Relief floods in, the manipulator's warmth returns, and for a moment, you feel like the conflict is over. That relief teaches your nervous system that surrender is what makes the pain stop. This leads to repetition. Because you folded, the next demand arrives faster, carries more weight, and requires even less pressure to land. We see this in the mother who sighs and mentions how many family lunches she has left just to secure a Sunday visit. By Monday morning, her daughter has canceled her own plans, feeling the immediate relief of her mother's approval. The resulting confusion, the belief that you are simply a bad daughter or bad friend, is the intended product of the loop. The pressure itself usually wears one of four distinct faces. Naming which one you're dealing with thins out the fog. The punisher is direct and openly threatening. They put the cost of your refusal right on the table, warning you that they will make your life difficult if you don't comply. The self-punisher points the threat directly inward. They suggest that if you don't help them, they will end up with nothing or worse. They turn your compassion into a rope, making you the warden of their well-being. The sufferer relies upon a silent martyrdom. They never officially make a demand, but they suffer visibly until you volunteer to fix their misery just to stop the ambient guilt. The Tantalizer simply dangles a constant reward. They keep the love or approval you've been starving for just out of reach, making it conditional on one more favor, one more sacrifice. Every one of these personas uses your own desire for peace to move you. These patterns take root most effectively in people who are highly conscientious. A manipulator targets your strengths, your loyalty, your empathy, and your hatred of conflict. They turn your willingness to care about someone else's pain into a handle they can use to steer you. They study your nervous system to learn exactly which silence you can't sit inside, and which version of "you're a bad person" you already half believe. They don't need to force you to do anything. They simply create the fog and let your own conscience walk you the rest of the way. This tactic hides in the relationships we're told are sacred: family, religion, and lifelong loyalty. These dynamics use moral language that we were taught never to challenge. Researchers in coercive control find that psychological domination is often longer lasting than physical harm. Because the control lives entirely in words, there is no bruise to point to. The damage is cumulative. Each individual demand looks small enough to grant, but when you stack 1,000 of them together, you see the shape of a cage that has slowly replaced your own identity. By the time the cage is finally finished, the person inside has usually stopped trusting their own read on reality. Recognizing the architecture of that cage is the first step toward leaving it. You cannot win the argument with a blackmailer, because the argument isn't about logic. It's about the lever. The defense begins the moment you stop responding to the emotion and start naming the structure. Separate the request from the punishment. Ask yourself if you would agree to the favor if there were no threat of anger or withdrawal attached to it. Treat the feeling of guilt as data about the pressure being applied, rather than a verdict on your character. Feelings of obligation can be manufactured by anyone who knows where your buttons are. Look back at that name on your phone. That cold weight you feel is the manipulator's fingerprint. Recognizing that dread as a lever is the moment it stops moving you. You can care for someone deeply while refusing to be the manager of their emotions. Once you see the lever, you can never quite unsee it again.